Today we are going to get these ledger boards installed. I'm getting the tubes filled up with cement right now, and we're not very far away. Hi everybody, I'm Jim Deerdorf and this is Detroit DIY. Our permit got approved and we're ready to get going. So I put my permit in an info box that I got for 13 bucks at Lowe's, a nice little weatherproof box. So that you don't have to spend the $35 or $40 on an actual, what they call a permit box. This works just fine. You can see the green sticker on there and it says approved. Lake is looking amazing today. Too bad the boat's not in the water yet, but it will be soon. And this is what I got going here. So I had a little bit of problems finding a cement mixer. We are in a rural area. I had to make me a little device here to be able to dump it in my wheelbarrow, but it's working just fine. Improvise. Before I can install this ledger board, there's some obstacles that I have to overcome. You can watch a lot of videos on YouTube about ledger boards, and it's not necessarily going to apply to your situation. And this is what you would consider an oddball situation. So here's what I think what's going on. I'm not even sure what you would call this siding arrangement other than vertical wood siding. It has a small gap between it, and it is just not what you would call normal. The other part of the issue for me is that it is 2 inches thick. There's another piece of wood back here securing it to the cinder blocks. So here's what I'm pretty sure I'm going to find. I believe that my floor is inset into the cinder blocks. This is an old ledger board that was holding a 5-foot roof. As you can see, it's nailed on. The bottom of my floor is about 3/4 of an inch up on this ledger board. So that's about what I want, is to be about 3/4 of an inch below the floor inside the house. So I figured that out by measuring from inside the house, from the floor to the ledge on that window up there. And then I came out here and measured from that ledge down to figure out where the bottom of my floor is. I know the floor is a 3/4 inch board, so that is what my mark is right here, is the bottom of the floor inside the house. So this is 3/4 of an inch, so I'm going to go from here. This would be the top of my decking board, so I'm going to mark down here, and I'm going to cut all this wood out of the way and find out exactly what I have back here. So I'm going to get this marked out and I'm going to start cutting it and find out. I'm pretty sure I'm going to find a cinder block wall. I've cut off this small section just above my head here. You can see it up there, and we'll get into that in just a minute. The reason that I have to cut this away is that the code says that the ledger board can be no more than 1 inch off of the structure, being 1 sheet of structural sheathing, such as 15/16, and a 1/2 inch spacer. That's why it's very important that your ledger board be attached properly, and to take every precaution to make sure that it is attached properly. So, and if you're going to do something that is outside of the exact wording of the code, so the code says that the ledger board can be no more than 1 inch away with a 1/2 inch sheet of, or a 15/16 sheet of structural sheathing and a 1/2 inch spacer, so that the ledger board does not have to be flashed, so water can actually run behind it. But if that's the case, then whatever the ledger board is attached to, if it's attached to the rim board of the floor joist, then that would have to be flashed. There still has to be flashing. So if you're going to space it out, then the rim board has to be flashed before you can space it out. And you can space it out with, they sell little plastic spacers that you can space it out with, or you can just pile washers on the bolt. So really and truly, at the end of the day, the ledger board can be 1 inch away from the structure. It's just dependent on how you get there. And no one says that the spacers have to be plastic or piled up washers. It could be pressure treated plywood. It could be anything of that nature that's going to last and be able to handle the weather. And you have to make certain that you flash everything correctly. So that's the reason I have to cut this away. None of this wood is pressure treated that this house is sheathed with. And then I have behind it the cinder blocks. There is no rim board. So it's just like what I thought. The rim board is inset inside the blocks. So let's take a better look at what we got up here. Alright, so I still have to cut this piece of wood away. Now this is rough sawn. There's several lumber mills around here, especially there's still some today, but back when this place was built, I'm assuming in the mid-50s or early 60s, that these were predominantly used in this area because of the local lumber mills. So they are a true 1-inch rough sawn board. And this is probably a yellow pine from this area right here. So, and somehow they managed to drive their nails through the cinder blocks. I'm not sure how they did that, but they did. And then what happens is we wind up with stuff like this. Now this isn't going to stop me from attaching my ledger board. However, it is going to change how I planned to attach my ledger board. Not necessarily how I plan to attach it, but I am going to put some lateral bracing in. And what I mean by that is I will have to drill a hole all the way through this block into the rim board on the inside of the house next to a floor joist and next to one of my joists, and then out here on the deck. And then I'll attach some brackets and I'll run a bolt all the way through, and I will tie one of the joists on my deck to a floor joist inside the house. So that will give me lateral bracing, so I don't have to worry about any lateral pull pulling these blocks out. Now I will probably take the time and chip a little bit of this out and fix some of this cracking before I attach my ledger board. They've also left a spot down here that they filled with styrofoam that I am going to have to make that structural, because the code reads that my first bolt for my ledger board has to be within the first 5 inches. So anywhere from 2 to 5 inches. So that is not going to happen because of this. So that's probably a good 6 or 7 inches away to here. So I will have to make this structural, and I will probably use rapid set mortar mix to actually do that, or Cementol, one of those two. They're very good products and they will adhere to this very well. Now I think this is just the end of the block. It is, and it's not real deep, as you can see, but I'll still have to fill that. And of course that paint will cause me a little bit of an issue getting it to stick, but it'll be alright. I'll get it. So I've also discovered that this is my floor. So I can see a little bit of the edge of the floor inside the house where they've taken some trim off. And this is the style of the floor. It's an overlap flooring, or a lap type joint on the flooring. So I thought that my floor was right here. The top of my floor, I was incorrect. About 3/4 of an inch down. This is the floor. So I would really like my ledger board to be down here just a little bit. So that means I did not cut enough off, and I will have to cut some more. Also, the anchors I'm going to be using all Simpson product for the anchors, and I'll be using screens, threaded anchors, and epoxy to hold those into this cinder block. And we will get into that further once we get there. It may even be a separate video, to be honest with you. I don't want this to be, a 3-hour long tutorial on installing a ledger board in an oddball type situation. But I just want you to know that there's no reason that you cannot install a ledger board in just about any situation. I've repaired all the mortar joints in the blocks, and I've got my ledger board laid out, and I've also laid out this piece of treated plywood that I've drilled my anchor holes in for my anchors. And I'm going to use my 1/2-inch masonry bit, and I'm just going to mark each one of these. Then I'll take these back down, and I'm going to drill a 3/4 inch hole into the block for the screen, the epoxy, and the anchor to get attached to the block. So I'll show you real quick. I'm not going to go into great detail on the anchor board itself or the ledger board itself in the layout, because it's different for different codes, different length joists and different size decks is going to determine the spacing of the anchors that you need. My anchors are going to be 1 foot apart. Code says I can be 21 inches apart, but it was just kind of easier for me to do a 12-inch layout and go between each joist in the center. So that's what I've decided to do. It's a little bit more than what code requires, but that's okay. The inspector's never going to say anything about, you know, oh wow, you went too close. So here's what we've got. You can see these holes that I've drilled into this treated plywood. Now this treated plywood will get attached to the house, and then the ledger board is going to go over the top of it. And the reason I'm using this for a spacer is because my wall sheathing is so thick that I need for my ledger board to protrude a little bit from this sheathing so that I can actually waterproof it and keep water from running down in here and causing me issues or rot in my sheathing. I'm not so worried about the block wall, but I am about the sheathing. So I'm going to get started on this. Now this line represents the top of my ledger board. So as you can see, this structure was built with very low ceilings. So I'm lucky in the point that my head's going to clear, because I'm, you know, 6 foot plus tall. So I'm lucky in that aspect. But the ledger board, the top of it is going to be right here, and the bottom down here. So 2 inches is pretty much what you're going to find to drill your hole from the top of the ledger board or from the bottom of the ledger board. And that is to help prevent split out and ledger board failure. So always make sure, DIY, you're doing this yourself. Make sure that you understand your ledger board attachment. It's very important. It's a critical attachment, and you want to do it right. And that's what I'm going to help you do. So I have here my Bosch Bulldog with a 1/2-inch bit. I am going to run it in hammer mode to just mark these hole locations. When I drill the through hole, I will only be running it in drill mode so that I don't splay out the back of the block when the drill bit goes through. I want that full structure to be there. I don't want to knock anything out of the back of the block. So I am going to use it in hammer mode, and basically what I'm going to do is just mark it so that I know where to drill the hole. I got no power. Power issue is resolved. I forgot to plug the cord into the wall. That helps a little bit. Don't you hate it when that happens? Like such. That's all I want, is just a little mark. So I'm going to get all these marked, then we'll drill some holes. I'm going to get these off, we'll drill some holes, and then we'll get these anchors in. All the holes are marked. I've got my treated plywood off. I just wanted to touch base real quick on how I repaired the cracked mortar joints. And what I did was I put this chipping blade in my Bulldog, and I put it on hammer mode, and I very lightly chipped out some of that cracked mortar. Then what I did was I mixed up some mortar a little bit looser than what you normally would, and I put it in this grout bag. It has a small hole in the end of it, and basically you put some mortar in here and you wrap it up tight, and then you can squeeze it out and kind of feed it into those grout lines. I also drilled a 1/2 inch hole in between each block joint, and I grouted that full of mortar. Each one of these joints I grouted full. This is not typically what you would see, a oak beam sitting on top of the window like this to hold the structure, but this is kind of what they did back in the 60s. They didn't always use steel plates. This is a rural area. This structure was probably built without any permits or any inspections, I would assume. It probably just wasn't a thing then. They built things the best they knew how. The nice thing is when I chipped out some of these grout lines, I did see rebar in some locations. So that's comforting to see that they used some rebar in this. So I know the structure was built well. Exactly what's attaching these together, I'm not sure if there's anything without tearing it apart. So this is what I have to work with. I know that my ledger board will be attached safely and securely. So I'm gonna get some of these holes drilled and we'll get some anchors in. I'd like to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed yourself, click on one of these 2 videos right here. Remember, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and help me out. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Tony Iaconelli and Brett Wimmer, because none of this could happen without them.